When my aunt looked me dead in the eye and said, "You don't belong in this family," I thought my heart would stop. Her words pierced through me, sharp and deliberate, as if she had been waiting for years to finally say them. In that single moment, the foundation of my life, the belief that I was loved, that I was one of them, cracked beneath me. I had spent my entire life believing I belonged, that blood and love tied us together. But to her, I was nothing more than an outsider, an inconvenience she wanted erased. I remember standing there, trying to steady my breath as her smirk widened. To her, it was a victory, a declaration that I was powerless and unwanted. And maybe, for a brief second, she was right. I felt the crushing weight of rejection, the kind that makes you wonder if everything you've ever known was a lie. But what my aunt didn't know was that the truth was never on her side. He didn't know that my grandfather, the man who raised me with love and called me his sunshine, had already left behind something that would unravel all of her plans. Hidden away in a dusty safe, locked behind numbers only he and I knew, was a document that would shift the balance of power forever. His will. His final words. His last act of love for me, the granddaughter he trusted more than anyone else. I can still see her face as she spat out those words, as if she could rewrite history with her venom. She believed she held control, that with my grandparents gone, she was the ruler of this family and everything they had built. What she thought was the end of my place in the family was actually the beginning of her downfall. Because when the truth of that will came to light, her arrogance shattered. Every lie she spun, every cruel word she uttered, every attempt she made to push me aside would come back to choke her. And when it did, the same woman who told me I didn't belong would be reduced to begging me, the one she tried to cast out, for forgiveness she never deserved. If I told you that the woman who tried to erase me from my own bloodline ended up on her knees pleading for mercy, would you believe me? If I told you that the family she tried to steal from me became the very legacy she lost, would you think I was exaggerating? Stay with me, and I'll show you exactly how it happened. My name is Emily. I'm 29 years old, and for most of my life, I thought family meant love, support, and loyalty. I truly believed that blood was enough to hold people together, that no matter what happened, family would always stand by you. But I was wrong. I was so wrong. I grew up with my mother. She was my everything, my comfort, my teacher, my friend. She worked harder than anyone I've ever known. She raised me on her own because my father, well, he was never there. He disappeared before I was old enough to even remember his face. For years, I told myself I didn't need him. I had my mom, and she made the world feel complete. But life doesn't always stay kind. When I was just 16, cancer stole her from me. The strongest person I had ever known was gone, and I was left with a silence that nearly broke me. That's when my grandparents stepped in. My grandfather and grandmother wrapped me in the kind of love that kept me standing when my world should have crumbled. They never once made me feel like a burden. To them, I was family, truly, deeply, completely. My grandfather used to call me his sunshine. My grandmother used to braid my hair and remind me that my mother would be proud of me. With them, I felt safe again, like I still belonged to something greater than myself. Even though I was broken, I carried my mother's dream forward. She always wanted me to chase knowledge, to fight for something bigger than just survival. That's why I decided to become a lawyer. I wanted to help people, to give them a voice when the world tried to silence them. I worked hard, through grief, through loneliness, through endless nights of study. and I carried her memory with me every step of the way. If I had to describe myself back then, I would say I was determined. Once I set my mind to something, nothing could stop me. But I also had a flaw. I forgave too easily. I trusted too much. I believed that if I showed people kindness, they would return it. My aunt, Linda, would use that against me. She knew that my heart was soft, and she knew how to twist that softness into a weapon. She saw every bit of forgiveness in me as weakness, and she made it her mission to exploit it. Still, for a long time, I didn't notice. I was too focused on proving myself, on building the life my mother wanted me to have. My grandparents cheered me on every step of the way, and I held onto their pride like armor. To me, they were proof that family truly meant love. What I didn't realize then was that love and loyalty can be one-sided, and the very people who should protect you can be the ones who try hardest to break you. Some of my happiest memories were with my grandparents. They weren't just guardians who stepped in after my mother died. They were my safe haven. Every Sunday, without fail, we gathered for dinner. My grandmother would cook meals that filled the whole house with warmth, and my grandfather would tell stories about his younger days. Stories that always ended with laughter. They had a way of making even the smallest things feel special. They never let me forget how loved I was. My grandfather used to squeeze my hand and call me his sunshine, as if I alone brought light into their home. And for a long time, I believed that light would never dim. Of course, not everyone shared that love. My aunt, Linda, was different. From as far back as I can remember, her presence was cold. She always seemed to carry a storm cloud wherever she went. When my mother was alive, Linda treated her like a rival rather than a sister. She was competitive in ways that didn't make sense, over attention, over approval, over who could do more for my grandparents. After my mother passed, it was like she transferred that bitterness onto me. She never raised her voice in open hostility at first, but her distance was sharp enough. Her hugs were stiff, her words short, her glances filled with something I couldn't quite name as a child. Later, I would understand it was envy. Still, I didn't dwell on it then. Life had settled into something I could finally call normal. I threw myself into school, into building a future I could be proud of. My grandparents were always cheering me on, attending ceremonies, celebrating milestones. I can still remember the way my grandmother cried when I graduated, or how my grandfather kept showing off my degree to anyone who stepped foot in the house. Those moments kept me going. They made me believe I was moving forward, not just for myself, but for my mother's memory too. When I landed my first job at a law firm, I felt like I had finally arrived at the life I had dreamed of. It wasn't glamorous, not at first, but it was mine. I worked hard, stayed late, built my reputation one case at a time. Every time I stepped into my grandparents' house, their pride in me made all the struggles worth it. For a while, I thought I had found balance. Love at home, purpose at work, and a future that looked bright. But peace never lasts forever. Not when jealousy is lurking in the shadows. Linda watched all of it. The love I shared with my grandparents, the pride they had in me, the success I was beginning to build. And every passing year, her bitterness deepened. I thought she was simply distant, but she was waiting for her chance to strike. Because Linda wasn't done. She had been waiting for her moment, waiting through my grandparents to leave this world so she could finally erase me. The first crack in my world came the day my grandfather passed away. It felt like the light had gone out of the family. He wasn't just a grandfather to me. He was a father, a protector, the man who reminded me every single day that I mattered. Losing him was like losing the last piece of safety I had left. At the funeral, I tried to hold myself together, tried to honor him the way he deserved, but grief pressed heavy against my chest. It was during that funeral, as people whispered condolences and shared memories, that Linda leaned close to me. Her voice was low, sharp enough that only I could hear. She whispered, "You're nothing but an outsider. Don't think for a second this family is yours." The words stung, but I told myself it was grief talking. Maybe she was hurting too. Maybe she just didn't know how to process the loss. I brushed it off, forcing myself to believe she couldn't mean it. After all, who says something so cruel when we had just buried the man who held us all together? But I would soon learn she meant every single word. Not long after, my grandmother's health began to fail. She had been fragile for years, but without my grandfather, her strength seemed to drain away. That's when Linda stepped in, not as a loving daughter, but as a gatekeeper. Suddenly, every visit I made had to go through her. Phone calls went unanswered, doors went locked. When I asked why, she would claim my grandmother needed rest, that she was too weak to see me. At first, I believed her, but deep down, I began to feel the chill of being shut out. One evening, I managed to catch Linda in the hallway outside my grandmother's room. She stopped me, her eyes cold, her lips curling into the cruelest smile. "You don't belong in this family," she said flatly, as if it were an undeniable fact. "Don't even think you'll get a penny when she's gone. None of this is for you." Her words cut deeper than I could admit. It wasn't about money. It was about belonging, about love, about the only family I had left. And in that moment, she stripped all of it away with a single sentence. That night, I cried myself to sleep. The kind of tears that come from a place so raw, you don't even recognize your own voice as you sob. But beneath those tears, something else stirred inside me. Something darker. It wasn't despair anymore. It wasn't helplessness. It was anger. A burning, unfamiliar anger that whispered to me that Linda wouldn't win. I didn't know it yet, but that anger would become the fire that carried me through everything to come. After my grandmother grew weaker, Linda's grip on the family tightened. She didn't just keep me away from her. She began working on everyone else too. Slowly, she poisoned their minds against me. She whispered that I was only around for money, that I didn't care about my grandmother at all, that I was just waiting for her to die so I could get my share. At first, I thought no one would believe her. They knew me, didn't they? They had seen me devote my life to being there for my grandparents. But lies have a way of spreading faster than truth. And soon I noticed the sideways glances, the hushed voices when I walked into a room. Before long, I wasn't even invited to family gatherings. Birthdays, dinners, anniversaries, they all happened without me. I would find out through pictures on social media or from distant cousins who still cared enough to tell me. Each time, it was like another door closing. Linda wanted me gone, and she was making sure everyone else agreed. The final straw came the day she locked me out of my grandmother's house. I had come to visit, carrying soup and flowers, desperate to spend even an hour with the woman who had raised me like her own. But when I tried to walk inside, the locks had been changed. I knocked for nearly 10 minutes before Linda finally appeared, smug and unbothered. She told me my grandmother didn't want to see me. I knew that was a lie. My grandmother would never refuse me. That night, I made up my mind. I wasn't going to let her shut me out any more. So I waited until I knew Linda would be out and slipped into the house with the spare key my grandfather once gave me. My grandmother was resting in her bed, frail but still able to smile when she saw me. We held hands, and I whispered how much I loved her. For a few precious minutes, I felt like I had her back. But Linda returned earlier than I expected. She stormed into the room, her voice sharp and loud. She accused me of sneaking in to steal. Then she pulled out a small jewelry box, shaking it in my face, claiming I had hidden it under the blanket. Before I could even defend myself, she was dialing the police. My heart raced. In that moment, I thought my entire world would collapse, that she would actually succeed in having me arrested. But then my grandmother spoke, weak, trembling, but fierce enough to be heard. She told the police I had done nothing wrong, that the jewelry had never left the drawer, that Linda was lying. They left without taking me, but the damage was done. I felt humiliated, isolated, and more alone than ever. I thought I was losing everything, my family, my dignity, my place in the world. But then I found the letter. I had reached the lowest point of my life. Linda had managed to isolate me from the family, paint me as a liar, and nearly have me arrested. For days, I walked around feeling hollow, wondering if maybe she was right. Maybe I really didn't belong. But one evening, I went up to the attic of my grandparents' house. It was a place filled with dust, old boxes, and forgotten memories. I didn't expect to find anything more than photo albums and yellowed papers. As I moved aside a stack of worn books, I noticed an envelope wedged between two boxes. My name was written across it, in handwriting I knew instantly. My grandfather's. My heart skipped a beat as I picked it up. His letters were always filled with wisdom and warmth, but this one felt different. The paper was heavier, sealed tightly, as though he wanted it hidden until the right time. With shaking hands, I opened it. Inside was not just a letter, but a clue. My grandfather had written about his office downstairs, about a safe he kept behind the shelves. He said that inside I would find the truth about our family's legacy, and that he trusted only me to protect it. I felt a rush of emotions, grief, hope, and something stronger. A sense that maybe, just maybe, I hadn't been left alone after all. I followed his instructions that very night. The safe was old, the kind you only see in movies, and though I had never opened it before, I remembered something. Years earlier, my grandfather had told me the combination as part of a game, teaching me numbers through stories. Back then, I thought it was just fun. Now I realized he had been preparing me for this moment. When the safe finally clicked open, I found folders, photographs, and most importantly, his official last will and testament. My breath caught as I read the words. He hadn't left the estate to Linda. He hadn't trusted her to carry on the family's legacy. No, he had left it to me. The majority of his assets, the family home, everything that mattered most, all in my name. His will confirmed what I had always felt in my heart, that he loved me, that I belonged, and that he believed in me more than anyone else. I sat there on the floor, clutching the papers, tears streaming down my face. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel powerless. I didn't feel erased. I felt seen. My grandfather had known what Linda was capable of, and he had made sure she could never truly win. That night, the fire inside me returned. Linda thought she had buried me, but she had no idea I was about to rise from the ashes. I began the planning in whispers and small, careful steps. Once I had the will, I knew truth alone wouldn't be enough. I needed proof to collapse the lies Linda had spun. So I started gathering evidence. I recorded her boasts about controlling the estate, copied notes she left that contradicted her story, and found documents that looked forged. I talked to neighbors who remembered strange visits, and to family friends who had heard her threaten to cut me out. Each testimony became another thread in the net I was building. I enlisted a lawyer friend who knew how to turn scattered clues into an airtight case. We met in quiet places and spent hours cataloging dates, matching handwriting, and preparing affidavits. She taught me how to authenticate the will, how experts would examine signatures, and how to present forged documents so the court would see them for what they were. We planned the reading down to the smallest detail: who would speak, how to challenge any fake will, and which witnesses would be ready to back me up. But a legal plan was only part of it. I needed Linda to reveal herself, to speak freely in moments of arrogance. So I learned to play dead. I stopped posting online, avoided family functions, and let her believe she had succeeded in pushing me away. It felt wrong to be quiet when everything in me wanted to fight. But patience was a weapon. Her confidence grew, and with it, her careless talk. I set traps. I left my grandfather's envelope back in the attic, knowing Linda liked to search for leverage. I placed a small recorder in the hallway where she took long phone calls. I opened a P.O. box to receive copies of bank statements and notices without alerting her. I quietly asked a trusted neighbor to keep an eye on comings and goings and to report any suspicious meetings. Each secret act built a clearer picture of her intentions. There were moments of risk. Once she nearly destroyed a vital paper by tearing it up in a rage. I had to retrieve the pieces and have them reconstructed by a document expert. Another time, she bragged in front of a cousin about plans to sell the house before anyone could stop her. I recorded it. When I overheard Linda bragging about selling the house to a buyer ready to swoop in, I smiled inwardly. She didn't know what waited for her. The hardest part was pretending to be broken. It felt like betraying the truth. But every quiet hour was a calculation. I moved stealthily, assembling audio, documents, and witnesses until the case would be unmistakable. I wasn't preparing to destroy someone for spite. I was preparing to reveal the truth my grandfather had intended to protect. The strike would be surgical, legal, and final. And when it came, there would be no room for her lies. Justice would arrive quietly, but it would be absolute. The day of the will reading finally arrived. The family gathered in the same living room where so many Sunday dinners had once filled the air with laughter. But this time, there was no warmth. There was only tension. Linda sat in the center, her chin high, her smirk sharp. She carried herself like royalty. Convinced that everything was already hers, I could see the way she looked at me, not with fear, not with doubt, but with triumph. To her, I was already erased. The lawyer began reading the documents Linda had provided, her so-called version of the will. She leaned back, arms folded, as if she had already won. She didn't notice the slight smile that tugged at my lips, or the brief exchange between me and my friend, the real lawyer I had brought along. We had timed it perfectly. Just as the false will was about to be accepted, my lawyer friend stood. Calm, firm, unshaken, she announced that there was another will, the true will, authenticated by the court and verified beyond question. The room fell silent. Linda's smirk faltered for the first time. The lawyer handed the envelope to the notary, who examined the seal, the signature, the notarization. It was undeniable. The words echoed through the room as the document was read aloud. My grandfather had left the family estate, the assets, the legacy, to me, his sunshine, his granddaughter he trusted above anyone else. The shock rippled across the faces in the room. Gasps, whispers, disbelief. And then came the second blow. The will exposed Linda's attempts to submit a forged version, proof carefully tied to her handwriting and her timeline. I watched her face crumble in real time. The confidence drained from her eyes, replaced with panic. She stammered, trying to deny it, her voice rising as she insisted there had been a mistake. But the evidence was ironclad. Every signature, every witness, every record backed me, not her. The forged documents she tried to pass off as real now looked like nothing but the desperate tricks of a woman consumed by greed. Her hands trembled. She turned to the family, pleading, but the faces staring back at her were no longer on her side. The lies she had fed them, the poison she had whispered, all unraveled in that moment. And I sat still, silent, letting the truth do the work. But I wasn't done. I had saved the best for last. Because while the family was reeling from the shock of the will, I had one more piece of evidence waiting. Something that would not just strip her of her power, but expose the full depth of her betrayal. And once I revealed it, there would be no going back for Linda. Not with me, and not with anyone else in the family. The room was already heavy with shock, but I wasn't finished. I had carried too much pain, too many scars, to let Linda walk away with just humiliation. It was time to show everyone exactly who she really was. I reached into my folder and pulled out the recordings. My lawyer played the first one aloud. The sound of Linda's voice filled the room, sharp and venomous, as she insulted my grandmother, the very woman she pretended to care for. Her words cut like knives. She called her weak, useless, a burden she couldn't wait to be rid of. Gasps echoed from the family members. Some shook their heads in disbelief. Others looked down, ashamed that they had once defended her. But the second piece of evidence was even worse. Bank statements, signed transfers, and documents that revealed Linda had been quietly siphoning money from the estate long before my grandfather's death. The numbers didn't lie. Not only did I inherit the estate, but I was also given full legal guardianship over the family trusts, the responsibility to protect what my grandparents had built. Everything Linda had dreamed of, holding in her fists, now belonged to me, sealed and protected by law. And she, the woman who told me I didn't belong, was left with nothing. That was the moment Linda broke. She collapsed into her chair, tears streaming down her face, her pride shattered. She looked at me, no longer with superiority, but with desperation. She begged for forgiveness, her voice trembling as she pleaded with me to show mercy, to remember that we were family. But I didn't forget the words she once said, the cruelty that had burned into my memory. I looked her in the eyes, steady, unshaken, and I delivered the only response she deserved. You said I didn't belong in this family, but this family belongs to me now. And in that moment, when the dust finally settled, I realized that what I had won that day was bigger than money, bigger than property, bigger than any title tied to inheritance. What I had fought for was something far more precious. I had fought for the memory of my mother, who raised me with love even in her hardest days. I had fought for the legacy of my grandparents, who never once treated me as anything less than their own child. And in the end, I had fought for myself, for the dignity that Linda tried so hard to strip away from me. There were moments along this journey where I doubted everything. I questioned if standing up for myself was worth the isolation, the accusations, the tears I shed in the dark. But as I stood in that room, watching the truth finally crush the lies, I understood that every step, every sleepless night had been worth it. Because I hadn't just survived Linda's cruelty, I had risen above it. Revenge, I came to see, wasn't about destroying Linda. If it had been only about that, then I would have walked away with nothing more than emptiness in my chest. No. This was about reclaiming what was always mine to begin with. It was about refusing to be erased, about honoring the people who believed in me when others didn't. It was about making sure the voice of love, loyalty, and truth was louder than the voice of greed. Now, when I walk through the halls of this house, My house. I don't hear Linda's cruel whisper telling me that I don't belong. Instead, I hear my grandfather's steady, loving voice calling me his sunshine, just as he always did. I feel the warmth of his belief in me, in every corner of these walls, in every memory etched into this home. And I know he would be proud that I stood my ground. As for Linda, she disappeared from the family's life as quickly as she tried to erase me. Her downfall was her own doing, and while I don't rejoice in her suffering, I don't regret exposing her either. Because the truth matters, and sometimes the only way to defend it is to fight. When I look at myself now, I don't just see the girl who was told she didn't belong. I see the woman who proved she did. Stronger, wiser, no longer afraid to stand up for her place in the world. I carry my scars with pride because they remind me of the battles I endured and the victory I earned. So I'll leave you with this question, one I've asked myself many times. If your own family tried to erase you, if they looked you in the eye and told you that you didn't belong, would you fight back or would you walk away? Because I fought, and that choice changed everything.